down today. I don't know if I've driven everyone off, or maybe it's everybody's at PTP, or maybe it's a combination of both. But I appreciate everybody being here. We do have a lot that's at PTP, so let's keep them in our prayers, as a lot of them will be traveling back today. I don't know who all is staying for the week, but we do have several that are coming back today. So let's just keep them in our prayers. If you've never been to PTP, I highly recommend it. It's a great time to listen to a lot of really good speakers, to learn a lot, see friends that you haven't seen in a long time. So if you can, make plans to be down there next year. So for obvious reasons, I think we won't rehash last week. So we'll get into something else this week. So we've been talking about how to worship and what that really means whenever we come into the assembly here. Today, what we're going to do, we spent the past 2 Sundays that I've been teaching, we've been talking about hindrances to worship. You know, what goes on around us, what goes on in our minds that keeps us from worshiping truly. So we ended with this slide last week. What can we do? What do we do to help us? And so that's where we will get started this week. I think the key point for all of this is education. I've received a lot of compliments on this class, and I appreciate every one of them. I told you all how worried I was to teach this class. So your kind words have meant a great deal to me. This is something that I got 3 weeks ago, something like that. I don't know. It says, I've been in the church since 5 years old. I don't ever remember being taught this, and it's something I've struggled with my whole Christian life. We come to worship every Sunday, but I agree with the person that sent this to me. I don't remember being taught how to worship. We're taught the pieces of worship. And that's really what we're trying to do with this class, is to teach all of us, myself included, on how to worship. Then I got this a couple days after that. These are things no one talks about anymore, and I feel like many have just gotten into habits and don't bother to think about how things they are doing or allow their kids to do affect people around them. We mentioned last week, we're all on different levels of our maturity. And while I may be able to dismiss something that's going on, someone else may not be able to. And so I do think that we've gotten into habits. And we don't think about, well, if I just get up right now and leave, it's not really going to bother anybody. Or if I'm allowing my child to kick the seat in front of them, it's keeping them quiet. You know, it's whenever we come in here, we need to have our minds focused. But we also, if we're parents, we also need to help our kids understand what that means to sit through worship. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. I've had I've had two men come up to me about them leading a prayer after we've talked about this. And I hope that I haven't made the mistake of bashing anyone. You all know that that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get us all to think about as we're going through this. And prayer is one big thing. And we're going to have one class just on prayer, so I don't want to get too far into it. But us men, whenever we're up here and we're leading, we need to have a heartfelt prayer for everyone to listen to be able to pray, and to be able to say amen. The two men that have come up to me after that didn't have anything negative to say. It was just like, I heard what you said, and it just seemed like that they were trying to understand that this is being led for the congregation, and that I need to have my thoughts in a way that everyone can say amen. We need to train new Christians and our members regularly. The second email, if you will, that I got, I made mention that I really do hope that we make a habit of educating the congregation. So this isn't just a one-off. This isn't Paul Glenn teaching how to worship, once every 3 years or something like that. I think it's something that Parker will preach from the pulpit. I think it's something, if we're a Bible teacher, that we're teaching our kids from young all the way through adult. I think it's very important, and especially our new Christians, and I said last week, I was telling Neil that I'd been here since '94. That's going back to Brother Cosby. Before that, I was here for about a year in the late '80s. Then we had Steve. Then we had Brian that came in, John that helped some, and now we've got Parker. This congregation has always had very strong preachers. So I don't think that we've got a problem with that. But I'm just, if we're talking about the churches as a whole, I think that strong, faithful preaching is something that that everyone needs to be thinking about. Whenever we were going through the process of hiring Parker, I can't tell you how many times that I emailed or texted or talked to Dale Jenkins. because we, as the eldership, we wanted to make sure that we had a strong, faithful preacher. And I got to say, I think we did it. God put the right person for us at the right time. Any questions about any of this before I go on? Yes. Well, thank you. And if you didn't hear Dennis, he said that the last time he prayed, he made an outline of, some of the thoughts that he wanted to pray about for the congregation. I don't see anything wrong with that. I've known people that will write out their prayer. Again, I just don't see anything wrong with that. You're talking to God for the congregation. Any other questions? Comments? So we've talked a lot about corporate worship. That's one part of worship in our lives. If you're not here for Wednesday night and listening to David Rader, he's doing just a fantastic job talking about Psalms and worship. And if you haven't listened to him, you need to go back, and I recommend going back and listening to some of his classes. He's just been doing a great job. But he's talking about corporate worship, cooperative worship, however you want to put it. We see that in 1 Corinthians 1:11. We hear that quite often before we have the Lord's Supper, because it talks about when we come together. And Paul, at that point, he's saying when we come together, the Lord's Supper should be about this. Hebrews 5:19, Colossians 3:16. What's that about, you all? Anybody? That's singing. And how we're supposed to sing. Hebrews 10:25. Don't forsake the assembling of the saints. So corporate worship, that's what we've been talking about this entire time, and what we'll continue to talk about. But what I don't want to gloss over or have any of us not think about is our personal worship. Private prayer and our Bible study. Those are two things that we can do to, one, worship God, but also to learn, to grow closer to God. How do we get closer to God other than prayer? I mean, that is us talking to the creator of the universe. So for us to dedicate time to have those long prayers, that's something that we need to set aside and do. And I got to say, I'm not awesome at this. I mentioned last week that long prayers in the assembly are very tough for me. Brother Winkler and Ira North both talked about that, and how people's minds start wandering. And I mentioned that even in my private prayers, they're not long. And it's because, guys, my mind is just always going. And I can focus for a little bit, And then I'm thinking about, okay, I need to be focusing on this. What did I do at work? Or what am I going to have for lunch? That's the way my mind is. Bart's smiling just a little bit. We've been in lots of meetings, and he knows that I can't focus a lot. But that's something that I can work on in my private worship to God. And my private Bible study, I go through fits. Sometimes I'm good. Vast majority of the time, I could do a whole lot better. And I'll say this, I read most of the time on my phone. If I were to pull up the usage of Bible versus something else on my phone, I'd probably be extremely ashamed. I think Bible study is something that I can work on. It's something we can all work on. And that's part of individual prayer. Family worship. I feel as a father, this may be one of the places that I fell down. I've got 2 wonderful daughters over here. I've got a wonderful wife. I'd take a bullet for any of them. What I didn't do, though, during their first years, we didn't have that family worship time. Yeah, we said prayers before our meals. And I got to say, it makes me feel so good whenever I see either one of the girls sit down, and the first thing they do is bow their head. God has blessed me with kids that are just unbelievable. I hope they stay that way. But I did not do a good job of leading the family in family worship. We didn't have those Bible studies. We didn't have those family prayers. Don't make that mistake if you're a young parent, if you're raising your grandchildren. That's important. Questions or comments? Y'all aren't nearly as talkative this week as you were last. Sandy. Sue, I'll get you in just a minute. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you couldn't hear, Sandy's talking about organization and having meaning in our worship. Talking about Parker and the way he's done the banners up here. he did this last year. I'm going to assume he's going to do it next year. You know, Parker, the one thing about him that that I really like is he does plan out a lot of things way ahead. And whenever he comes to the elders, he goes, you know, this is what I've got planned. He's got a lot of things, doesn't he, Bart? I mean, he tells us a lot of what's on his mind and why he's doing this. And I think it's great. I just love it. Sue. Yeah, Sue brings up that a lot of people don't have the education program that we have here. And I got to agree. I grew up in a small congregation as well, and I did have my own Bible class. But a lot of churches just don't have that. You know, David was the deacon of education for years. And I know he and Connie put in hours and hours and hours to put together a curriculum for everyone, and it's been wonderful. Now, that still takes teachers, so if you ever want to teach, see Paul, or I think we got one or two others that help coordinate all of that. But it does take the teachers to teach what we've got. Anything else? Alice? Right. Alice is talking about her and Bob's health problems, and they weren't able to come to worship for almost a year. And it makes you realize just how nice it is to be here among your brothers and sisters, getting the support that we all need at times. Anything else? Okay. One thing that, and we'll get into this as we go through other lessons, is participation. You know, I have told you all for how many weeks now? 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that. Coming in here, sitting on a pew is not worship. You actually have to be doing things. You have to participate. And so what does that mean? As you're singing the songs, look at every line. What does that line say? Can I truly sing that song or sing that line? I got to tell you, there's a song or two that there's 1 or 2 lines I just can't sing. Can't remember what they are right now, but every time we sing it, and it's not something that we sing all the time, I'm like, I don't know that I can sing that. And it's not that it's wrong. I'm not saying that. But is that what I feel as I'm singing? Brother Winkler talked about having the song leader be a Bible, being a student of the songbook. What do those songs mean? And I got to say, the song leaders that we have here, they're good. David Crutchfield, not Rader, David Crutchfield has told me how long it takes him to get ready for a song service before Sunday. He looks at the bulletin, he sees what the sermon is about, he looks at the Bible verses, and then he tries to pick out songs that go with that lesson. A lot of congregations don't have that kind of talent that we have here. And it's not just David Crutchfield. I know others do it as well. But all of us need to be thinking about what we're singing, and do we agree with that? Participation in the sermon. For years, I looked at that as, okay, I've done my time. I've sung, I've prayed. Now I can just sit back and relax. And that's not what the sermon's for. The sermon is for all of us to learn something, to be edified, to get closer to God. And that requires all of us to focus. And how do we do that? One thing that I used to be really, really good at was taking notes. I had a notebook, and I was a pretty good note taker. I had to be in college because I wasn't the smart one, so I had to be able to take good notes. And I was talking to somebody else, I don't think she would mind me saying, but Danya Simmons and I, we were talking about that, and we both talked about how taking notes, although I'm terrible at it now, focuses our minds. If we're turning to the scriptures and we're writing things down and we're making note of what the important part is, maybe it's just a point up on the slide, maybe it's something that Parker has said during the sermon, that helps us stay focused. When you're giving, what goes through your mind? For a lot of us, no. Let me say this. In my household, I don't know anything about the finances. I have a widget on my phone, and it has one thing on here. It says Paul. And it's how much money that I have to eat out on for the month. That's the extent of what I know of our finances. Bart's over there, yeah. That's literally all I know. Michelle writes the check, and does everything else as far as the finances go. So I don't hand that check and put it into the plate. I don't think about it whenever the check is written because it's written while I'm getting ready. So what do I do during the giving part? What should I do? I do my very best to think about the blessings that I have. We've got a house, we've got air conditioning. Our neighbors had to get his air conditioning replaced yesterday. I asked him how he was doing. He said, I'll be doing a whole lot better here in a little bit. My family and I are extremely blessed. Most everybody in here is extremely blessed. Everybody in here is. So we can, even though we may not write the check, we may not be putting money into the plate, we can still do our part in the giving. And that's thinking about what God has given us. Questions or comments? Prayer. Like I said, we're going to be talking about this later on, but focus as best you can. I have mentioned I personally don't think long prayers should be said in public. Wendell Winkler said the same thing. Brother Winkler said he has a hard time focusing. It's the same thing with me. One thing that I can't remember if it was him or Brother North mentioned. Okay, if you if your mind is wandering and you can't focus, say your own prayer. But focus as best you can. Men, you've got a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to say a prayer that everyone can say amen. I've talked about that enough. The Lord's Supper. What do we think about whenever we are partaking of the Lord's Supper? You know, one thing that I've done a couple of times whenever I've presided, and it's something that I actually got from Brother Winkler, is I put up a slide of all seven sayings on the cross, I think is what it is. Had that up on the slide for everybody to look at. I don't do it every time because, then everybody would say, well, he can't think of anything else to say, so he's going to do this. But to me, that helps me really think about the cross itself. Other times I think about the garden and the agony that he was going through. I've made mention many times my fear of needles. I used to dread going to my doctor whenever I was younger. Every time I walked through the door, I was getting stuck with something. And it was a long drive. Well, as a kid, it was a long drive to where the doctor's office was. And I knew as we were driving there's two great big propane tanks. This was an industrial size. And I knew whenever I saw that it was just one turn before I got to the doctor's office. And man, I dreaded that. As long as I didn't see the tanks, I was okay. I dreaded seeing those tanks because I get this little needle. Can you imagine what the Lord went through that night before? I cannot understand the dread and the fear that he had. He knew what was coming. And it wasn't just the pain, the physical pain. It was the mental anguish. It was knowing that all of these people that he is dying to save is completely against him. Those are some of the things that we can all do, that we can think about during the Lord's Supper. Cultivating worship as it pertains to atmosphere and time. The atmosphere should be joyful, hopeful, and loving. Joyful does not mean that you're going to be entertained. Personally, I think that that's the problem with so many churches out there today. They feel like they've got to entertain their congregation. Worship is for God. We get things out of it, yes. But if you're coming through the doors to be entertained, that's the wrong mindset. We should also have a culture here. Every church should have this. That is loving, that finds hope in the message. Can't remember if I've got it here. No. I'm not going to say it here. And I got to say, the elders meet with all of the new members before they place membership. And almost to a person, they talk about how welcoming this place is. This congregation does a great job welcoming people, getting them involved. I love seeing, if you're not here on Wednesday nights or Sunday night, there's this little group here It's usually right around here of the young adults. They'll be here 20, 30 minutes. They're welcoming new people of that generation. As an elder, I love seeing that. Bart, how about you? It's uplifting. People don't say, okay, the amen has been said, I've got to leave. That's not what happens here. And it's uplifting for me. Respecting time builds trust and encourages attendance. We talked a lot about this last week. I don't want to rehash, so I won't. Strategic service order enhances focus and reverence. What do I mean by that? We're not given a checklist of you've got to do this and this and this and this. The elders have struggled over the past couple of years, and I'm not going to say struggle. We've thought a lot about how do we make the worship flow better so people don't lose focus. Let me give you a for instance. We used to have the Lord's Supper, then we had a song, and then we had giving. And we thought, okay, what if we were to take the song out, keep the flow going a little bit, there's less up and down. We've put a person up here now for giving. My girls have said that they really like that because it actually does set apart that part of the worship service from the Lord's Supper. We've also moved the announcements from the end of service to the beginning of the service. What else have we done? I know we're talking about other things, but I can't remember anything else. That's the type of thing that I'm talking about. Brother Winkler talks about that a lot in all of his lessons. You have to have an engaging service. Start and end on time without losing spirituality. Ira North talked about that a lot in his book. You've got to respect people's time, and you have to do that without sacrificing anything spiritual. Children and conduct. Okay, what's the one thing we don't give kids to play with? Anything with wheels, thank you. But we're also, as they're sitting here, that's a time for us to teach. Okay, you're in the presence of God now. So sit here, this is why we're doing this, this is why we're doing that. One of my first memories in worship was my oldest sister teaching me how to turn the pages. It got into the hundreds, so that was 3 places, and that was pretty hard for me. But she got me to where I could do that. It was a teaching moment. We can do the same thing with our kids. Yeah, the songs are up here, but they can still turn to the right song. We can also teach them to write down the scriptures. Do we still have out there, Sarah, the pieces of paper for the young adult? Hannah says yes, so I'm going to go with. So there's a piece of paper out there, and it has songs. Which songs did we sing? And they could write that down. What Bible verses did we read from? Just another way to teach them how to sit in here. Use training rooms and nurses wisely. I think we do that well. I think maybe some other congregations don't. Proper conduct and training to ensure reverence. Again, that goes back to teaching them how to sit here. I am going to harp on this for a little bit. We've got 15 minutes between Bible class and service. They can use the restroom then. I know there's times that we have to say, yeah, I've got to go. But whenever it's week after week after week after week that the same child is getting up and going to the restroom, that's not a bladder problem. And we need to teach our kids, you've got time to do that. We're going to sit here for an hour and worship God. Because one, they're not sitting there learning, but they're also disturbing everybody around them. Cultivating worship through mechanics and presentation. Attention to detail, the microphones and everything is done back here. If you ever want to work back here, please let one of us know. We would love to have more people back here. But it's also around dress and the visuals. You know, you don't want to have me having slides that have a lot of zoom fades and all of that. Dress, I'm not saying that everybody needs to wear a tie. I never wear a tie, as y'all can see. But I do think that it should be appropriate. Using technology to enhance, not distract. Again, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Jason and I, we have a lot of back and forth about what technology we should use, what we shouldn't use. I think the system that we have works well for everybody. I think it's engaging. I think that it helps. But it is something that we continue to think about. Announcements should be concise and reverent. That's something that, something else that we did as the eldership was we said, okay, if it's going to be announced, it shouldn't be in the bulletin. Everybody can read the bulletin. Everybody can read the slides that Sarah puts together. So what we did was we said, okay, unless it's something really important, we're not going to announce it up here. So we have tried to shorten the announcements because we know that I can get long-winded and talk too much. So we've tried to fix that. Start and close services with sincerity and order. We do a great job, I think, welcoming everyone. The song leader at the end, again, reiterates, thank you for being here. Please be back at the next time. There's things that we can do. Okay, second bell. I promise next week we'll get into something completely different. But I appreciate you all being here.
Some people one time, they were complaining about kids talking in worship, making noise in worship. I said, well, if you take notes and focus on it, you won't pay attention to it.
Very true.
She said she didn't know they were supposed to put it out.
Where's the bread?
Should be in there.
Yeah. Well,